Welcome to Flashpoints. I'm Jeff Pegues, joined by CBS News senior national security analyst Juan Zarate. Peace talks, Yemen peace talks in Geneva beginning June 14th. What can we expect?
Well, I don't think much, unfortunately, Jeff, but the reality is on the ground, we've reached a stalemate between the warring parties. Keep in mind that the Houthi rebels, which now control Sana'a, had sort of swept through the country on the doorsteps of Aden, the major city in the south, have ousted the president, Hadi, who's now in exile in Saudi Arabia, with the Saudis coming in with their coalition and their air power. All that has led to, frankly, a stalemate. And I think the parties in Yemen, and certainly the external parties, realize that. That's what's led to these discussions. The question is what will give here? Because the Houthis maintain territory and they maintain power, in some ways the upper hand on the ground. The Saudis aren't going to send troops in. You aren't going to see a Sunni coalition invade Yemen anytime soon. And Hadi isn't going to be escorted back to Sana'a. On the other hand, the Houthis want legitimacy. They don't want to continue to be bombed, and they want some semblance of order. And so the parties do have at least a reason to talk. What the solution is unclear to me, and what complicates this even more, Jeff, aside from the internal fighting, is that this has become a proxy fight, as we know, between the Iranians and the Saudis for influence in Yemen and really on the doorstep of the Gulf. And so it's not just what the parties at the table will say and do, it's also what the external parties, including the Sunni and Shia powers, will have to say about this.
Will the U.S. have a representative there?
It's unclear if the U.S. will send a rep. It seems that the UN-backed talks, at least for now, are going to be internal to the Yemeni parties. And so it's a number of the warring parties, the political parties that have a say. Hadi, the exiled president, will be there in Geneva as well. But it doesn't look like, as a part of the formal discussions, there are going to be external parties. That said, I would imagine that on the margins, there are going to be external international representatives, certainly from the UN, but I would imagine there would be American elements there, diplomats perhaps on the margins, to have bilateral discussions. Imagine as well you're going to have Saudis, perhaps even some Iranians there. But for now, the talks officially are just the Yemeni parties.
But obviously the U.S. has an interest in this. So what do you think the U.S. wants to come out of these talks?
Well, the U.S. has multiple interests at play. You know, the most immediate for the U.S. is the terrorism problem that emerges out of Yemen. Keep in mind that U.S. counterterrorism officials, and you know this well, Jeff, still talk about al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula as perhaps the most dangerous of the al-Qaeda affiliates out there that continues to plot against the West. The reality is al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, though they have less territory now than they did, let's say, 2 years ago, still control a bulk of territory in Yemen. They control a major city in eastern Yemen and are relatively comfortable because they're not fighting either with the Houthis or others at this point. And so they're in some ways in a prime spot, in a safe haven in Yemen. And so the U.S. obviously doesn't like that. We want that to be disrupted. We need to go after al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. And we don't have a presence on the ground. Keep in mind, we've left the embassy, we've left our military base there.
But do U.S. drone strikes continue? Well,
there is apparently still unilateral direct action happening, but it's happening, I think, at a slower pace than what we've seen in the past. I think intelligence has gone blind to a certain extent because we're not on the ground. A lot of our allies with whom we've been working are distracted or fighting other fights currently. And those that we've been training, we've talked a lot about relying on proxy forces on the ground or allies on the ground. A lot of those have been either killed, dispersed, or fallen into different camps. And really, they're not worried so much about al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. They're worried about their power, their survival, and their factions. And so, in some ways, Yemen for the United States is a wicked problem because we've got the problem of al-Qaeda, we've got the problem of regional stability, we've got the fact that it's a proxy battle for the region, and there is no easy solution out. There has to be a political solution. But the reality is they may have to fight it out a bit longer before we reach that solution.
And we will see what comes out of these peace talks. For Juan Zarate, I'm Jeff Pegues, and that is Flashpoints.